Hello and welcome to today's webinar on your guide to Learnosity's analytics and reporting. It's 8 a.m. here in sunny Sydney. Big welcome to all of our attendees dialing in from all around the globe. My name is Jordan Hume. I'm one of Learnosity's product owners specializing in our Learnosity analytics offerings, and I'll be taking you through today's content. Today we'll be talking about the basics of Learnosity reporting, just to make sure we're all on the same page, and then we'll be diving into the analytics offerings around reporting for individuals, reporting for classes, reporting for large groups, some old offerings, some of our newer things as well, a whole mix of Learnosity's reports and how you can use them to really get deep insight into the performance of your users and your students. We'll also talk about customizing your own reports. I've got some additional resources for you. And we'll take a look at some of our upcoming analytics features as well and how they might be useful to some of your projects. As we go through today's webinar, please do make a note of your questions. There will be a way to send those to us at the end. And we're very keen to hear your thoughts on the content that you see today. And we'll get back in touch with you if there's any specific areas that you'd like more information on or anything else that interests you in today's webinar. So please do make a note of those as we go through. With that said, let's dive into the basics of Learnosity reporting. And I will say this is going to get technical for about the next 5 minutes, but if you're here for something more visual, something that you want to see how Learnosity's analytics offering can fit into your products and how we can visually get some insight into student outcomes. That will be just around the corner. Just stick with us for the next 5 minutes and then we'll get into something more visual. So I wanted to start with just talking about the 3 key data points that are going to make your Learnosity reporting really flow more smoothly if we get a handle on these 3 main data points. These are the 3 things that you'll provide that are relevant to reporting every time that a student interacts with a Learnosity assessment. And that's the activity ID, the user ID, and the session ID. So if we think just about the activity ID to start with, each time that a Learnosity student interacts with the Learnosity assessment, you'll provide us the activity ID to indicate the learning activity that they are attempting at the moment. So in this example, we have we might have a chapter 1 test and a chapter 2 test. These might be some of the activities that we offer in our system. Maybe there'll be chapter 3, 4, and 5 down the track for these students, but at the moment, we're just looking at chapter 1 test and chapter 2. So we've given each of those learning activities different activity IDs to differentiate them when students attempt these activities. When the students actually interact with each of these tests, you'll need to pass the user ID of the student who's undertaking that test. And you'll also need to provide a unique session ID for every student when they attempt the activity. And that session ID represents the student's unique attempt of that activity. So in this case, we've got student 1, and they're taking both the chapter 1 test, and then maybe on the same day or maybe on a different day, they're assuming this chapter 2 test activity as well. We've given them a different session ID here, session ID B. The session ID, if you actually, when you actually come to implement this, the session ID has to be a version 4 UUID. But for these slides, I've just simplified that to A, B, C, D, E, F, etc. So here we've got these same 3 students, and they've attempted both of these activities, the chapter 1 test and the chapter 2 test, and we've given them a unique session ID for each attempt. Now the activity template ID is something else that will be important, but we'll come back to that later. So just remember that one. The main ones we're talking about for now are the activity ID, user ID, and the session ID. I said before, if that session ID represents a unique attempt of each student against a learning activity. So if a student attempts the same activity multiple times, we can give them a different session ID each time. So here student 1 has made 2 attempts of the chapter 1 test. So the activity ID stays the same because they're still attempting the same questions. They might be attempting 10 questions on that chapter 1 content, but they only get 5 right on the first attempt here. So they take a second attempt and we just give them a different session ID on the second attempt to differentiate those, but they're still against the same activity ID. If you have multiple classes taking the same learning activity, that same 10 question chapter 1 test, then it's up to you how you want to allocate your activity IDs across your different classes or different schools. So multiple classes could use the same activity ID. Here we've got class 1 and class 2 are both taking the chapter 1 test, but maybe over here class 3 and class 4 attend a different school. Now we might want to give them their own activity ID. What that would allow us to do in reporting is it will allow us to easily scope the report to just the students at school 1 versus the other students at school 2. Some customers also give each class of student their own activity ID. So all of class 1 would take chapter 1 test, the class 1 version, for example, and all of class 2 would take chapter test for class 2. So they can actually have different activity IDs per class, and that again helps during reporting where you can specify you just want to see results on this activity ID, and that will automatically only find you students within that class. So it's really up to you how you use the activity ID here, but we would recommend that wherever the test content stays the same, you reuse that activity ID to represent students undertaking the same set of content in a single sitting. Next up, let's talk about item tags. So this is one of the really important ways that you will be able to use Learnosity reporting to drill down into how students are performing against particular curriculum outcomes. So to do that, we need to tag the items in our Learnosity item bank with the curriculum content that those items relate to. So here we're looking at chapter 1 test, and we've got the first 3 items from that test here, item 1, item 2, and item 3. And our student 1 is going to take those 3 items as part of their chapter test. And we've tagged each of these items with the course outcomes that they relate to. Tagging in Learnosity is made out of a tag type, which consists of a set of 1 or more tag names that relate to that tag type. So in this case, the tag types that we've tagged item 1 with are the topic, subtopic, 2 standards, and this skill. This particular item relates to the algebra topic, and the subtopic is 1.2 solving equations. So this structure seems to indicate that this item is part of a textbook that's divided into topics and subtopics, and those are numbered as we see here. Now the standards that I've tagged this particular item with relate to the United States Common Core, and a particular area of that around solving word problems. So it looks like this particular item, item 1, actually relates to 2 different standards, and that's fine. You can tag the same item with multiple tag names within a single tag type. So here we've just tagged it with the multiple standards that this item relates to. We've also applied this skill tag. This is a fictional one that I've made up, but it represents one of those what I call cross-cutting tags that might apply across multiple topics or subtopics of a curriculum, not necessarily limited to the content hierarchy, but they're more about something that's cross-cutting and applies to different areas of the course content. So this particular item is related to the skill of patterns in math. If we look at the structure of the overall Chapter 1 test in this example, you might see that we have multiple items here from the subtopic of 1.2 solving equations. And then item 3 is actually maybe a revision item. We're bringing that one back from topic 1.1 substitution. This test hopefully will help this student understand these different topics and also help their teacher understand how they're progressing through this content. If you do apply tags to your items through Learnosity's authoring tools, you might see an icon a bit like this. This is how we show them in the authoring UI. So you can apply your topics and subtopic tags through our authoring tools, and you'll see iconography like that. Now, I mentioned before that we would come back to the activity template ID, so I wanted to just clarify something about the data we're talking about here. There are 2 parameters that you can provide on a Learnosity activity. Those are the activity template ID and the activity ID, and I wanted to just disambiguate those 2. The activity template ID is a reference to the activity that you want to load from our Learnosity item bank. So if you author an activity using our Learnosity authoring tools and you name it activity 10445 like this one here, and you name it that way in our authoring tool, then when you go and deliver that test to a student, your developers will be passing that activity reference here as the activity template ID. So that's that activity template ID links your assessment back to some item bank content that you prepared earlier. The activity ID is the one we've been talking about in our previous slides, and that's to do solely with reporting. It's an arbitrary string ID that's used to group related sessions together for the purpose of reporting. You can set the activity ID to be the same as the activity template ID, or you can use an arbitrary activity ID. The flexibility is up to you, but some of our customers do find it easier if they make those 2 things the same, so that it basically makes communication between your development team and your authoring team a bit simpler if you're debugging an issue, or might just help them understand which content they're trying to deliver in this particular area of your platform. So that's a choice to make in your Learnosity implementation, but the flexibility is there to do with it as you will. One last clarification about Learnosity reporting. Learnosity sessions are scored asynchronously after a student submits them. They're usually scored within a few seconds, but that can take longer during periods of high load. Most of our reports, if you try to initialize them as soon as a student has submitted their work, you might redirect them to another page and immediately try to show them a report of their progress or their results from that test. Those reports that you initialize on that page, most of them will auto retry for up to 30 seconds if they cannot initially find that student's data. This is a little mechanism that we've built in on our side to try to make this asynchronous scoring a bit easier on your development team. But it's something to keep in mind, and it's important to develop your system with fault tolerance to the idea that these session scores may not be immediately available after a student hits submit. Let's bear that in mind. So that's it on the technical stuff, but you'll see how those core ideas of the activity ID, the user ID, and the session ID are really important to helping us structure our reports. So let's dive into the analytics offerings, particularly around individuals, classes, and large group reporting. To talk through this content, I'm going to be referring back to this grid. This grid is basically showing the different offerings that Learnosity has when we talk about individual reporting, class reporting, and large group reporting. And down the left-hand side, we've got this list of feature areas or offerings, solutions that Learnosity has some good products for. And so if we start at the top there, we've got really basic reporting around just providing a score number back to students. But as we go down, rich feedback becomes important. Learning outcomes are around understanding a detailed view of how your students are performing against their curriculum, and comparative analysis to do with comparing groups of students against each other. We have a whole lot of other features in this grid as well that we're not going to get time to go through today, but I will have some links to those if any of those interest you. So just a quick note before we get started. We will be talking today about the Learning Outcomes report and also some large group reporting in our Aggregate Report offering. Those two report types are some of our most advanced, and they are available to most existing customers as of 2019. They're also available to enterprise customers or as an add-on for standard and scale customers if you've signed up under our new tiered pricing model. If you have any doubts about that, just get in touch with your support representative and they will be able to advise the best way forward for getting access to those reports. But most existing customers do have access to everything that we're going to talk about today. So let's start off with reporting for individuals. And this is some of our basic reporting around delivering some scores back to students, helping them understand where they went wrong with rich feedback. And then we can also look at learning outcome reports for individuals as well. The purpose of this kind of reporting for individuals is to show a personalized profile for an individual learner. You might use them to give instant feedback to students to help them self-direct their learning, or to create report cards, or even a parent's dashboard, if you can imagine sending a link out to a parent once a week or once a month, just to update that parent on the child's engagement with their digital learning. We might be able to use the kinds of individual reports that we're going to look at to build one of those parent dashboards and keep them engaged in their child's learning as well. So let's look at an example. As we go through these visual examples of how Learnosity reporting can fit into your product, I'll be using this mock-up, which just represents the host platform that Learnosity embeds into. As you probably know, Learnosity is made up of a set of pluggable widgets or components that fit into your platform where you need them. So I'm just using this grey mock-up here to represent that platform that you or your development team are working on at the moment. It doesn't have to look anything like this. You could have a series of modals, you could have your navigation over on the right here. That's totally up to you. I'm just using that as an example of the host system that we sit inside. But let's say the way that you've architected your system is that you have a individual student view where they log in and see their own dashboard or a history of their activity. So maybe you have profiles for students a bit like this one. I'll use Bart as an example. He attends Springfield High School in Northwest Metropolitan District. He's in grade 7, taught by Mrs. Krabappel. And maybe Bart, when he logs into your system, he might want to see a submissions history of the work that he's done over the recent weeks. And so here's the first of Learnosity's report types that we'll look at today. This is one of our report types that you can just embed into your platform where you need something like a submissions history. And here we've got down the side here just showing the activities that Bart has undertaken. Now each of these is one of those activity IDs that we looked at earlier. So it's a specific learning activity with some specific content, and we're just showing Bart's particular attempts of those activities. This particular report is called the Last Score by Activity report. It takes a one or more user IDs and also one or more activity IDs. So we've just passed Bart's activity ID to this report and the activity IDs that he's attempted that we want to show here. And as you can see, we're just showing a simple progress bar view of Bart's result in each of these topics. So he started out, he was getting a few right. He didn't attempt very much content, but he was doing okay. And more recently, he's been attempting a lot more, but also getting a lot more wrong. So just some example data there. But what we can do is drill down into any of these activities in this list here. This is one of the features available in any of the, or most of the Learnosity reports, where you can attach your own click events to any of these head of row values here around the activity. So when you attach those click events, your development team can actually route the user to anywhere else you want them to go. It's a bit like a hyperlink. You have full control over where that link takes the end user and what gets shown. So in this case, when we click down into Chapter 2, Test A, Bart might want to see some more info about his particular attempt of that test. So here we've got another 3 Learnosity report types that we've used to build this example view. Over on the right here, we've got a session summary, which we pass a user ID and a session ID to, and we get the raw score that Bart has attempted on his activity there. Next up, we have the last score by item by user report. Again, a user ID and the activity ID that we want to show in that report. And then over on the left, we have a detailed view of feedback for Bart, so that he can see exactly where he went right and where he went wrong on each of these questions. Our session detail report does show what the correct answer was. That's optional, you can turn that off, but in this case we're showing Bart what the correct answer was so that he can learn from his mistakes and maybe attempt this activity again and see if he can improve his score. Our traffic light reporting here is just showing an overview of all the items in the test and the ones that Bart got right and wrong. And you can see there are 2 here at the end that he didn't attempt. So it's just a really simple dashboard that we can show Bart to help him understand his results on an individual test. Something else that Bart might want to see is a more detailed breakdown of how he's going across the learning outcomes that this particular course is targeted towards. This is where you can use our learning outcomes report to give that detailed breakdown. And this is a really highly flexible report that works on your item tags. So one of the important things, if you want to use a report like this, you do need to tag up your item bank content with all of the topics and subtopics that content relates to, or any other tags that are relevant to your content. This report's fully customizable based on whatever attributes are relevant to you. In this particular example, it looks like Bart's studying a language course. So he's been taking content that's related to listening, reading, writing, and speaking skills. And he's tackled the first 3 chapters here. And we can just see for each of the skill areas that he's been working through, we can see how he went against each of those across the different chapters that he's been attempting. So we can see he started off, he was doing really well in listening, needed to work a bit harder in his reading skill. Then he introduced in chapter 2 some writing content, but he's picking up strongly in chapter 3 on those basic skills, and now he's introduced some speaking in chapter 3, and that's probably the next area for him to focus on. But I said before that this report is highly flexible and can show different attributes of your content. So for example, if you tagged your content based on the question types that Bart was attempting in each of his learning activities, then you could show that question type breakdown in this report as well. So here we've just got the different types of content that Bart has attempted across those same learning areas. So you can see he performs really strongly when he's doing MCQ-based listening questions, and also really well on the reading questions that are related to MCQs. Once he has to give short answers though, his score goes down a little bit. So maybe with that more unstructured kind of content, he might need to keep practicing that. And maybe, there's nothing stopping you building your own widget over here on the right-hand side that could direct Bart to relevant content for him in any of these areas. We can see also as we get down into some of these more enhanced item types, Bart's score there. And down in spoken response questions, we see that that's only relevant to speaking. Makes sense. So it's just a really simple way of understanding Bart's exposure to different content types. We can also see if we tagged our content with some of those skills, those cross-cutting learning outcomes that cut across the content hierarchy, like listening, reading, writing, and speaking. The skills in this case being comprehension, fluency, vocabulary, and pronunciation. Then we can see the intersection of Bart's work and his outcomes on each of those areas. So we can see, for example, his comprehension is really good in the area of listening, but not so good in spoken work. His vocabulary is very strong in written work, but again, his vocabulary in speaking could use some improvement. Same with pronunciation. So this tells me that Bart should probably be practicing his spoken work as much as possible, and maybe also working on the fluency of his writing. So we can get insights into Bart's progress really easily here. This could be useful to Bart himself, Bart's teacher, getting an understanding of Bart's individual learning profile, Bart's tutor, or Bart's parents. Let's move on to reporting for classes. And we'll see here, we'll start off with the last score reports, and that's a really basic traffic light view of how students are performing within a class. But then we'll move on to using that learning outcomes report that we just looked at for Bart, but expanding that out across a whole class of students. Reporting for classes is all about understanding the class's performance. So their content completion, their skill mastery, and we use these reports to try to optimize the teacher's time. Our understanding here at Learnosity is we can use these reports to help teachers best direct their effort and resources where they're needed most, and also to analyze class behavior and engagement with a digital platform. There are some quite advanced metrics that you can get access to through your Learnosity reporting. So we'll look at things like completion rate and time spent in our examples. So going back to our example system here that might reflect something like the platform that you're building, you might give Bart's teacher, Edna, a view of her classes, and she might be looking here at her class 7K. It's got 28 students in it, and she's looking at that same test, the results of the Chapter 2 test, and just trying to understand after Chapter 2 where her students are at. So a really simple way of doing that is just to show a class list using one of our Learnosity reports here. We show a summary of the students' scores here, just a percentage score on this class test. And we also show a traffic light report for the students' performance against each item in that test. So this Chapter 2 test A has 10 items in it, and we show a green dot for correct, an amber dot for partially correct, a red dot for incorrect, and unattempted questions are grayed out. So some basic insights that Edna might get from this is she can immediately see, well, Nelson just seems not to be doing his homework. He's got a huge number of items here that he hasn't even attempted. So that's some basic feedback that we could give to Nelson, or maybe Nelson's parents. You can also see in this report that item 3 is a question that almost no students have attempted. Now, we might want to ask those students, or ask the class, why that might be. Is it because the question is confusing? Do they not understand the content? Do they not understand how to answer that particular question? Maybe it's just that item 3 is the hardest question in this test. And that's some useful information for us as well. Maybe we want to do a worked example of that one so that everybody understands how to tackle that particular type of question. If you embed this report in your system, you also get these helpful pop-ups for free. So those are built in as part of the report functionality. And this particular one, if you hover over any of these score bubbles, it would show you the overall score for that particular item. This one here is out of 2 points, and Milhouse got full points on that one. And we also capture the time spent. Now, an important caveat here, the way that we capture the time spent is based on our own assess player. So you can get access to that time spent only if you've delivered your assessment through Learnosity's assess player. That's using items API in assess mode. If you've delivered it that way, then we will capture the time spent based on the time that students are looking at each individual item before they page to the next item. That way of delivery also gives you access to a built-in session timer. You can pause and resume activities through there. It has a table of contents, it has a next and back button. So you get a lot of navigation and a lot of bells and whistles on your assessment for free just by using that mode of delivery. So we find lots of customers find that an easy way to get up and running. If you capture that time spent value, it just gives you a sense of where students are spending their time. And we see Milhouse answered this particular question in record time. And we'll come back to a more advanced use case for that time spent later on. But another way that Edna might want to look at her class results is, again, by that learning outcomes reporting, trying to align and understand her class's results based on the curriculum that she's teaching. So we can use that same learning outcomes report for a whole class of students. And probably the best way to understand this is to go to a live demo. So I'll do that now. This has got the same content that we were just looking at in that slide. It's available on our public demos site. You will get the link to this demo at the when we send out the slides in the next couple of days. So you'll be able to explore this yourself, or you can log on to demos.learnosity.com and see it now. Just as an overview of what we're looking at here, we can see in this particular case, Edna is now teaching some math content. And her report here is showing her the 12 chapters of the math content that she's teaching, from algebra all the way through to applied geometry here. And we've got her class of students down the side, and we just have a basic progress bar of student results for each, well, for the whole math content. We can see Milhouse, for example, has answered 2,300 questions so far. His overall score is 81%. But we also get the breakdown of his score by each topic that he's been working through. So we can see, for example, he's got 84% in algebra here, only 71 over here in statistical analysis. We see that for the whole class. So the interesting thing to note is, for example, Milhouse has attempted some matrices content that just about no one else in the class has. He's maybe forging ahead on his own to do some self-directed learning there. You might want to speak to Milhouse about his progress through matrices, whether that's an area of particular interest to him. We might want to give him some extension work there and help guide his learning there as well. But we can also drill down into any of these topics to understand better how people are performing. So if I look just at the overview here, it looks like just about everybody's scoring 75% or above in algebra. Might be happy with that result, but here we've got some 71s, some 72s. So maybe I want to drill down into functions and graphs just to understand where those lower scores are coming from. I can drill down to these subtopics within this particular chapter, and I can see all those student results split out by subtopic here. So here we see Milhouse, he's maybe dropping a few marks in his linear equations work. So maybe that's an area for him to focus on. We could give him some extra revision in that area. Everyone's doing fantastic in quadratics. We've got huge number of green boxes here. So that's good to see. But powers and polynomials is probably the area across the whole class that we might need to do some group revision on. We've got some 63s, 61s. We could pair those students together to do some revision work together. We could pair them with Nelson here, who's got an outstanding result of 96, or Sherry. So this is just one way to just understand at a deep level the areas of the curriculum that students are performing well in or might need some more support. We can drill down again to the curriculum codes that are supported by or that support any of these subtopics within the course content. So we can immediately see where we're ticking boxes in the curriculum and where we might need to do some more work. So looking at this breakdown, maybe we want to do some more over here on whatever this area of the curriculum is, ACMGM 011. So we could go and look that up in our curriculum text and undertake some extra activities there. We can go back up the hierarchy here as well, back up to that overall view. And I just wanted to say one more thing about our integration here, which is that we've got this helpful highlighting on to highlight these green boxes around scores that are above a certain threshold. In our case, it's 80% or more, but that highlighting is custom functionality that's really easy to implement on top of the base report. So the base report comes with none of that highlighting, but you can look at the source code of this demo and you'll really easily see how you can turn on that kind of highlighting. You could highlight that based on a totally different parameter like low scores that are 60% or less, but those thresholds are totally up to you and your development team to customize. So just other ways of looking at the data and drawing attention to something that a teacher might use in their day-to-day work. Coming back to the slides here now, and just looking again at that report in situ. Again, you could have other custom content anywhere else in your page here that might help Edna direct her class to the content that's going to help them excel in the areas that they need most. So that's just one way that we can help Edna make the most of her time and really specialize her and craft her teaching to the needs of her students using our learning outcomes report. Finally, let's talk about large group reports. This is using our aggregate report product, which came out a little over 18 months ago. And this is used for comparing large groups of students. Now you'll notice I've blanked out rich feedback and learning outcomes here. And that's because for rich feedback, you really want to be doing that at an individual or a class level. There's not necessarily a use case that we've seen for providing, really rich, detailed feedback on which questions a student is getting wrong at that large group level. That's more in that scenario where either an individual or a teacher is looking at some results and trying to give some personalized feedback. Same with learning outcomes. We see the best use case for that being where you know the students' names, your teachers are trying to give a personalized or trying to personalize their teaching to a specific class or individual. So we don't see that working so much in the large group area, but aggregate reports does extend down to classes and individuals to the extent that you can compare an individual or a class performance to the performance of their overall cohort, and that can help contextualize their result. A bit more information about that. So we use large groups for analyzing schools, districts, departments, or demographics, up to 200,000 learners at a time in one of these reports. And we're using that to calculate kind of averages for a demographic or a region or a district or a geography. A note about the demographics, Learnosity doesn't capture any demographic information about your users. So generally, all we know about a student is their anonymized student ID. We don't know which school they go to or which class they're in. We don't know who their teacher is or what their address is. We don't even know their real name. And so when we look at this large group reporting, there is a way for you to provide that information as part of the report, as long as you're tracking it, but we don't keep track of that ourselves. But if you have that access to that information, you can report on it using our large group reporting. This also helps see systemic patterns in learning and achievement. So using averages or using statistics about the classes that we're looking at, we could see some systemic patterns in the education of large groups of students. And we're also using it to contextualize individual and class results against school and district averages. Let's have a look at an example. So in this case, we might be Seymour Skinner, a principal of Springfield High School. And he might be interested in understanding the performance of Springfield High in relation to the other schools in his district. And so we can use Learnosity's Aggregate Reports to do something like that. And I'll dock across to a live demo of this as well. And the data in this one will look slightly different to what Principal Skinner was looking at. I just wanted to use this demo because it's a slightly richer experience. But basically, Principal Skinner might be looking at something like this. He can see some surrounding districts, the Greater Central. He's in the Northwest Metropolitan, but he's got another 2 districts here. He can see the number of students that have attempted the activity that he's reporting on here. Now, again, it's important to realize that this particular report is working based on that activity ID that we saw earlier. So if we've allocated the same activity ID to all the students across schools and across districts, then we can use this report to compare their results on that kind of assessment. Obviously, we'd hope that that assessment was delivered in under controlled conditions. It doesn't make much sense to compare a one school that's done the test with their teacher as a kind of interactive learning exercise versus another school where the students took that under controlled conditions. So we've been quite specific about the way we've implemented this to encourage you to use it in cases where students have taken the same learning content under the same conditions, and we use an activity ID to group that together. So Seymour can see the number of students that have taken any of these, this particular activity that he's done this analysis on. And over on the right, we've just rendered a simple visualization of how students went in this activity in each of these districts. So we're showing the minimum and maximum scores in the Northwest Metropolitan area here. We also show that the majority of students, about 50% of students, are performing within this range here. We've got the median or average result marked here at 53 for this district, but we can drill down and we can see a bit more information about where that's coming from. Here we have the list of schools inside the Northwest Metropolitan area, and we can see their range, but we've also contextualized that using this shading here. We've contextualized that within the results of the district that these schools form a part of. So we've kept that average score for the district, and we're just plotting each of the schools within that range. Again, we can see the minimum and maximum and the overall general cohort distribution at each of these areas, and we can drill down to Springfield High. Again, we keep that context up here as we look at the classes across Springfield High. Now, an example here of that anonymization that I was talking about, all these names that you see on the left here in the Springfield High and Metropolitan area, those are all provided by you at render time of this report. So Learnosity actually doesn't know which school is which or which district they're in. So we just have this anonymized data on our side, but you're providing the names and locations when you render this report. So here we've got the classes in Springfield High, and we can see we've got some top classes and a bottom class here that we might need to give some extra support to. We can also drill into the classes themselves, and we won't find Bart Simpson in here, But what we will find is the individual scores that these students got on this activity as a percentage. Again, we keep all of that context around how they're performing in relation to their district or their school or their individual class. And we can actually see really quickly where the cutoff is and where our students start performing below average. And we might want to group those students for a separate kind of learning experience, some intensive revision, or we might want to do some remedial analysis to understand what we can do to help those students improve their scores. That's our aggregate report, and just an example of how someone like Principal Skinner or a district administrator might use this kind of reporting to understand the distribution of performance in their particular domain. So we've talked through those different kinds of reporting for individuals, classes, and large groups, and seen how we can use some of those basic report types to build up a dashboard view for a student or a teacher. Also how we can use the learning outcomes report or the aggregate report to really dive deep into how students are performing against their curriculum outcomes, and also how students are performing compared to the average performance in their region. One of the important things to realize is that you can actually customize and rewire the reports that we've looked at today. They all provide ways to get access to the raw data that they use to render their particular views. And then once you have that raw data, you can display that in any way you like. You could build a bar chart or a column chart. You could build your own custom dashboard out of that information. For the developers on the call, you can do that using the render false flag or public events and methods like data listener. The learning outcomes report has a score mutator. The aggregate reports has a get group method. Some things to Google after this call. But the key point here is that you can get access to that raw data and you can recombine it in new ways to create your own custom dashboards. Let's look at an example of how we might do that to give Bart a bit more information about his performance to date. So here we're looking at just a summary of all the work that Bart has done, and we're combining information from his raw score reports to show his score here, but we're also plotting that in relation to his class average here. We've given him an indication of his rank, and because you're in control of this customization, you can decide how to display any of this data in a way that's going to make the biggest impact for your students. Just some ideas here. You remember that we talked before about time spent, and maybe you have an idea that it's useful to show students the time spent in platform and on task, and how that's contributing to their score. So we could show something here. We could get access to that time spent data from that last score report that we saw earlier. And we could just chart out the amount of time that Bart has been spending on content from each of his chapters. You could see he started off spending a lot of time and that's dwindled in the more recent chapters. And we can also then chart his score on each of this chapter work over the top of that. This is just an example of how you can combine, remix, rewire the data that underpins the Learnosity reports to build a dashboard that's going to be relevant to Bart and relevant to his teachers and give them more insight. All this data is available to you. I'm sure your designers can come up with something much prettier looking than what I threw together here, but it's just an example of how you can use that data. So to summarize the analytics offerings that we've looked at, that raw data is available to all of those individual class and group reporting offerings. And of course, you can recombine, as we saw with Bart's dashboard, some data from, for example, the large group report, and bring that into the individual context to help Bart understand how he's going in relation to his class. So just because you're building an individual dashboard doesn't mean you don't have access to our other report types that might help you with class or large group reporting data. I said that we don't have access to cover off all of the other offerings within analytics, and perhaps those are topics for a future webinar. But I did want to just touch on them in case you're interested. You can see a summary of all our report types through our demos site or through our reference material there. We have a documentation page that lists out all our report types, and you can see interactive examples of those and all of the technical information on how they are implemented and configurable. There's an example of live proctoring and monitoring type reporting, and this is a webinar in itself, so we won't go into it today, but if you have a proctor-led test kind of offering where teachers or a trained proctor can lead students through an exam, that's an example of a live proctoring offering that we have available for that kind of use case. We also have item analysis, and this is more on the authoring side of our analytics offerings, and it's there to help authors understand the quality of the content that they're producing and produce better quality content for your end users. Console Insights is a module within our new console management platform that's all about giving you high-level metrics on your Learnosity usage. So Console is the home of management and administration information in relation to your Learnosity instance, and you can get an insight there into how your end users are using the platform, what content has been authored, what content has been delivered, and at what scale and volume. Another area that is a whole webinar in itself, the data API, that's our REST API for raw data access, and customers use that for their own replication and warehousing. So I've just linked the reference material there, but that's how you get access to all of your assessment data and item bank data that Learnosity is storing on your behalf. You can use that REST API to get access to that and do your own data processing, data warehousing, your own pre-aggregations, and build even more powerful reporting. So we will come back to this slide, but feel free to take a screenshot and check out some of these links in your own time. These links will also be included in the resources that we send out after this webinar. So having looked at all those product features and the dashboards that you can build with them, and some examples of how you can customize them, might be time now to just look ahead a little bit at some of the upcoming analytics features that are in the works. I will say in advance, these are all in development, but we don't have hard and fast timelines on any of these, so I won't be able to promise any delivery date for you on this call. But this is just an insight into the things that we're working on, and we're particularly interested in any feedback that you have for us around these areas, and also partnering with you to understand how we can make these features most useful to you and your platform implementations. So we'll be looking at just two areas today, distractor analysis, otherwise known as response analysis, and improved manual grading support. And these are just two areas that we've heard a lot of feedback about, had a lot of feature requests about, and we're just starting the journey on understanding what these really are and how we can make a difference in these areas. So let's start with distractor analysis. Our understanding of this kind of problem is that it's to do with showing how a class or a group of students responded to a specific item or question. It's used to help identify common misconceptions among students and to group students by misconception for the purpose of reteaching or providing additional support to them, or maybe doing some project-based learning that targets those misconceptions or helps them get a better handle on the material. We can also use distractor analysis on the authoring side to identify problem items or to identify difficult knowledge areas that our platform is not supporting well enough. Let's look at some examples of how distractor analysis could be used to gain some insight into your students or your content. Here we've just got some example mock-ups of some of the visualizations we're playing with. Again, only an example, no guarantees that this is what our end UI will look like, but we can see here if we're just looking at MCQ questions in this example, so none of our TEIs or short answer questions, nothing like that, just MCQs, and we're just charting the frequency of response, or the number of students, percentage of students who responded with each of these MCQ options. So we had 4 options available, A, B, C, and D. B was the correct answer, and in this first case, we had 55% of students in this particular activity who responded with the correct answer. So this is probably good news. Probably means that the students are understanding well, more than half of the students are understanding the content. But we also can see that most of our students are getting confused and selecting, those students who get the question wrong are getting confused and selecting option A. So we might want to group all those students who selected option A together and just understand what it is that's making them choose that option, and just maybe reteach them some content or get a discussion going about that. With another question in this second example, we can actually see we've got most students selecting an incorrect answer. They're selecting option C. So we might want to really understand why those students are selecting that option, and again start a class discussion. But this is maybe feedback to the teacher that they just need to cover a particular topic in a bit more depth, because most students are actually misunderstanding that content. In the final example, we've got a more even distribution of responses. The most common one, 30% of students selected that, but that means we've got 70% of students selecting the other options here. Again, most students are getting this one incorrect. So in this case, where we've got an even distribution of responses across the available options, we have to ask ourselves, what's the reason for that? Is it because the class has misconceptions relating to options A, C, and D, and that's why they're choosing those? Is it because the item itself is confusing and we could pass this to our authoring team to improve the content there? Or maybe, if we're doing a more high stakes examination, maybe this item is just a good discriminator. It's the one that sorts out your low performing students from your high achieving ones, and helps with that discrimination of ability level. So maybe this question is doing its job well, and that's going to depend on your platform, your use case, the particular content that you're delivering to students, and the reasons for delivering that content. Here's another example of a different way of looking at the same data. Maybe it's a simpler way. This is just a straight grid of student names here, and then I've just highlighted where students provided the incorrect answer. So without doing any fancy charting, we're literally just showing the raw response that students chose. And in this example, we can see, for example, Bart, Milhouse, and Nelson all selected B as their incorrect answer. And so that probably points us to the first area of content that we want to go and revisit, item 7. Let's go and find out what that's tagged with, and maybe work through with the class that content again. We can also see both Bart and Nelson had the same misconception on item 3. And again, we might want to get them to pair together and just discuss why they chose that option, and maybe we can give them a hint with Milhouse's help as to how how they can solve that problem correctly. So again, just an example of different ways of looking at the same data. And I can't give any guarantees around how our end UI will look here, but if either of these two visualizations seems useful or valuable to you, or if it doesn't, we're really interested to hear that feedback. And I'd encourage you to send us a note at the end of the webinar just with that feedback, and we'd be more than happy to reach out and understand what's going to be useful in your particular use case for distractor analysis. The other area that we're looking at the moment is improved manual grading. And there's really three pieces to this puzzle, and they're loosely related. So it's not clear to us yet which of these we're tackling first or which is most important. We just know that there are these three areas that are challenging for our customers. And those are around rubrics, grading per question and per student, and the rich feedback to students. So just starting with rubrics, we understand that there's two different types. One of those is a rubric that's specifically for scoring. So it's a little UI widget that helps a teacher input a score, for example, for an essay, where they're doing manual grading on an essay. It might break down their score into grammar, spelling, and content categories, and it might allow them to select a mark out of 2 in each of those categories. It might give them some text guidance on what those categories mean, what each of those scores might indicate in a sample response. There's another kind of rubric that's just for teacher reference. So they might have their own text box or radio button or some way of inputting a score, but the rubric is just there to provide instruction to a grader. So those are the two kinds of rubrics that we know about and that we're looking at as a problem to solve within Learnosity. It's also grading per question and per student. And we've heard requests for grading both ways there. So either a teacher wanting to see all student responses to a single question before they move on to the next one, or a teacher who wants to see the entire student's, a single student's entire exam paper before they move on to the next paper. We've seen cases for both, and so both are relevant to our exploration of how we improve manual grading for our customers. The final one is that rich feedback to students, and we know that rich feedback is one of the most valuable inputs that we can give to a student to help them improve their outcomes. And so we're looking at more ways to do that around text feedback, audio feedback, really useful in language learning. We've also got rich annotations. You might have seen our annotations offering come out for student use, and that allows students to draw on their exam paper or leave little sticky notes on their exam paper. So rich feedback is one that we're looking at as well to help teachers provide that input directly, personal input direct to students' learning journey, and help improve their outcomes that way. So again, just look at a couple of the features that are in progress specifically around analytics. There's a whole lot more going on in the other development teams, but these are some of the things that we're looking at in analytics. Again, no hard and fast release date on any of these. They're just in exploration at the moment, and they're things that we know we want to tackle. If these are highly relevant to a project that you're picking up now or considering for future, please do reach out to us. Even if you've already built this stuff and you think there's some really valuable feedback that you can give us around how we implement it, please do reach out to us using the link I give you at the end, and we'd be really pleased to engage with you around how to make those useful for your particular project. So to sum up, we've talked today about those different offerings across individual, class, and large group reporting. Simple reports that provide scores, or maybe a session detail report that provides rich feedback on Bart's exam paper. Looked at our learning outcome reporting and how that can help guide teachers into the areas that best or most need their attention in their class. And we've also looked at aggregate reporting and how that can help at the administrative level for educators at that higher level, looking for summarized information across large groups of students. Here's that additional resources slide again. Do take a screenshot if you're interested in these, and you will get these links at the end of the presentation. And the last thing here is around, if you do have those questions, or if anything in today's webinar has interested you, please do reach out on support.learnosity.com, and that will reach our global support team, and they'll be able to route your query to the best person. It may be that you and I jump on a call in the next couple of weeks to talk through any of the things you've seen today, or if you have some specific feedback around those upcoming features, very keen to hear that as well. That's it from me today. I hope to see you on another upcoming webinar. My name's Jordan Hume. I'm one of the product owners for Learnosity Analytics. Thank you so much, and speak to you again soon. Bye for now.